Well, welcome back. We're talking about the future of China-U.S. relations under the leadership of a new U.S. president. Still with us, Cheng Li is a senior fellow in foreign policy at the Brookings Institution. Qinduo Xu is a political analyst with China Radio International, and Marc is founder of Caracal Communications and an expert in China-U.S. business ties. Cheng Li, let me start with you. Let's talk about security between these two countries and what preoccupies these two countries. The South China Sea, that's a region where these two countries have very, very different views. How much of an obstacle is that to better relations between the U.S. and China?
Well, it is an obstacle. Fortunately, that there's some recent development, like the Philippine president actually takes a pro-China approach, and China also tried to reconcile its relationship with Vietnam. And the General Secretary of the party visited China a few months ago. Now, but there's some misperception on both sides that the United States think that China wanted to use South China Sea, eventually kick United States out of the region to end American military cruise, Navy cruise in that region. But for United States, they think China has the ambition to be a dominant power, a hegemony in the region, maybe even in the world. So both, I think, that is really exaggerated. The reality is that no one wants to have war. I think all the party, the leaders, especially China, United States, along with the regional countries, should sit down to put these things aside, because it's not just a dispute about the territory, not about the issues about the history, but it's really the stability of the region is crucial for further development. They should find a way for navigation and free navigation. They should find a way to explore that region, the natural resources together. I think this is the only solution, and really the solution could benefit from the region and also the world. Otherwise, really, it's a serious disaster that you cannot foresee that kind of war, what kind of domino effect it will cause, and what kind of consequences we will face.
What do you think, Marc? Is there a negotiated, diplomatic way out of this?
Well, you hope so. I mean, obviously, the alternative is not very appealing, and there's so much economic activity in that part of the world. Any kind of disruption to that with any kind of military, even a small skirmish, would be such a setback that it really, you hope that cooler heads prevail and look at the big picture, because it's so important.
Qingduo, if we look at what's happening right now, recently the United States deployed an aircraft carrier in the South China Sea, and that led China's Global Times newspaper to say that the deployment of this warship poses a military threat to China. How does China see these moves, and how does it respond?
Well, in China, many observers are watching closely, but the general feeling is like we are not clear, what's the true intention of the U.S. patrol, with an aircraft carrier strike group. This is taking place at a time when China is actually improving its relationship with the Philippines, with Malaysia, with Vietnam. And China has agreed with the Philippines and Malaysia to settle the disputes in a bilateral way through negotiation. And now the U.S. is sending out an aircraft carrier in this region. And then people are questioning what kind of a signal the U.S. is to send out. And is the U.S. is trying to improve its military presence in the South China Sea by increasing the frequency of the so-called, freedom of navigation patrol in this area. And then the question is like, how frequent is enough? Basically to put enough pressure on the Chinese side. There's a danger if Beijing could be put under public pressure to increase or to install necessary weaponry for self-defense, to defend itself from the so-called military threat from the U.S. Side, and then we would see an escalation of the tension in this region. So this is no good. We know at the time Beijing is speaking to ASEAN countries on the code of conduct in the South China Sea. Hopefully, a set of new rules will be out at the end of this year. That's the plan. So I think the regional countries have the wisdom and determination to solve their problem peacefully. I'm not sure aircraft carrier will be helpful in this end.
Well, if I may, I just want to add that I certainly understand Chinese perspective and Chinese sensitivity, but let me emphasize that the U.S. naval cruise in this area is not something new. We have been doing that for a long time. And again, Chinese leaders in a number of occasions said that it's not China's intention to end all these things. And certainly that the U.S. has a lot of responsibility in that region. So I think that for China, I don't think we should, especially Chinese public, I understand there's a pluralistic nature of Chinese media, and the Global Times may not necessarily represent Chinese government view. We should also understand that for American audience. But having said that, again, both sides should be really, calm down, not overreact on the things that are previously already happening. But for the same reason, the United States could be very, very strongly react to China's, effort to build island. And so again, both sides should look at the big perspective, not overreact to certain incidents.
Marc, when we look at that big picture, what does the United States see? I mean, the world is changing. Allegiances are changing as well, and the United States must recognize that. To what extent is that pushing tensions up?
Well, yeah, clearly China wants more say in the world, and frankly, there are many people in this town and around the country that would like to see China take on a more active role. I think what's interesting, just speaking about the U.S. Navy alone, the amount of humanitarian work that the Navy does on natural disasters, being first on the scene, so having the presence, so encouraging China to take a more active role in solving some of the issues that face the planet, whether it be climate change, North Korea, these are all encouraged. So I think the rhetoric, the stuff that's being said, right, sometimes doesn't match the reality. And I think it's also looking at the other voices in both capitals to look at a bigger picture to solve these problems.
Cheng Li, when it comes to security matters, there is one area, one concern, where these two countries have the potential to cooperate, and that is the nuclear program of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Well, the Chinese, Mr. Xu mentioned about Iran, but I think the more urgent issue is about North Korea. I think that the United States made it very clear they hope that China will continue to play an important role to resolve that issue, because it's China's vital interest, because North Korea is so close to China, and also that you see that the South Korea, maybe Japan, also want to develop a nuclear weapon if that things continue. So I think there's a real good chance for Chinese leaders and along with the relevant parties to try very hard to deal with the urgency of the issue. I think that this area will really show goodwill of China's relationship with the outside world, and I think that some of the behaviors are not acceptable. I think that China should also continue to deal with that kind of reality.
Yes, China is doing exactly that. If you look at the latest story from China, basically China is put a pause on the importing of the coal from North Korea. We know how important that is, because the export of coal to China, I think, stands for like 46 something % of the total export to China from North Korea in terms of the value. So that would be a huge blow on the North Korean side. Obviously, Beijing is taking much tougher step against North Korea. So this has put a solid foundation for Beijing and Washington to cooperate even closer on how to deal with North Korea, the issue here. At the same time, Beijing has been always calling for Washington to sit down and talk to North Korean side. Because, at the same time, you have to understand that there's a real concern on the North Korean side, security concern, let's say. There's a strong U.S. military presence in South Korea. And given what happened in Iraq, in Libya, and in other countries, North Korean leaders, of course, feel insecure with the U.S. military so close to their borders. So I think, ultimately, we need to talk to each other and probably solve this problem through a peaceful means, to avoid the worst scenario.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it.